Hi, everyone. There are still lots of people logging on, but I think we'll get started. It's so amazing to see so many people here. We're at 280. It's incredible. So, hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. My name is Terry Rodak. I'm a librarian here at CAMH, and I'm also the co-chair of the Reconciliation Working Group alongside Diane Longboat. On behalf of the RWG, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us today on Orange Shirt Day and Canada's first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The incredible piece of art featured on our opening slide that you're looking at right now was created by artist Lisa Boivin, Dene interdisciplinary artist, bioethicist, and health educator to support the Reconciliation Working Group's 2021 theme, Living the Reconciliation Journey. To start our gathering, CAMH Elder Diane Longboat will offer a traditional opening. Diane?
Thank you so much, Terry. I'm so grateful that you've taken time to join us today, and I always want to let you know that on these important occasions, we're far apart and join each other through these great medicines. I thank the Creator this day for giving us such a beautiful day, for the presence of those thunder beings that are close by that bring the voice of the Creator, and for the opportunity that we have to do this important work together. We think about the children today, those who attended, the thousands who attended residential schools, and although the numbers are 150,000, we know there were many more. We know that there are many who never made it home from the residential school. And we also know that many have been found now in unmarked graves throughout the country, and many more also to be found. So we think about those children today, and we also think about the survivors and their families. I am a first-generation survivor of the residential school experience, and I remember today my ancestors, my beloved ones that went through that system. I think about all the healing that needs to happen, and I give thanks to the Creator that our ceremonies are still in place that enable our communities to restore themselves and become revitalized once again. And I think about this day, Creator, and give thanks that we work in an institution that values traditional healing and enables traditional healing to occur alongside medical practice. So this day, Sangwe Jisong, I give thanks for all of my colleagues, for all of what we have been able to work towards together at CAMH in a place where we are valued and we are respected. And this day, I give thanks this day for all of the ancestors, for all of those that are appearing to us in Spirit Month, which is October the 1st. Those ancestors are the ones that are bringing us dreams and visions and guiding us on the way forward. So we honor all ancestors of all nations as we move forward together. We give thanks this day that we can do this great work in that spirit of peace. Nyawa. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Diane, for those words to send us in a good direction and ground us in this discussion. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement and situate myself in this conversation. My parents and grandparents came to Canada as refugees in the late 1940s from Poland and Czechoslovakia in the aftermath of World War II. All four of my grandparents were Nazi concentration camp survivors who risked everything and worked tirelessly to build stable lives in Canada, to lay the groundwork for me to have a safe, comfortable life filled with opportunities. I'm deeply grateful for this, and I recognize the many amazing things about Canada that allowed my family and those like us to flourish. At the same time, I also recognize that my quite wonderful Canadian life is a direct result of the systematic persecution and exploitation of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Even though I'm not personally responsible for all of it, I know that the way I'm able to live my life is a direct result of settler colonialism. CAMH is situated on lands that have been occupied by First Nations for millennia. lands rich in civilizations with knowledge of medicine, architecture, technology, and extensive trade routes throughout the Americas. In 1860, the site of CAMH appeared in the Colonial Records Office of the British Crown as the council grounds of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, as they were known at the time. Today, Toronto is covered by the Toronto Purchase, Treaty Number 13 of 1805, with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Toronto is now home to a vast diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis who enrich this city. CAMH is committed to reconciliation. We'll honor the land through programs and places that reflect and respect its heritage. We'll embrace the healing traditions of the ancestors and weave them into our caring practices. We'll create new relationships and partnerships with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and share the land and protect it for future generations. I'd now like to introduce CAMH President and CEO, Tracy MacArthur, to say a few words. Tracy?
Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you for that welcome. And I don't want to take too much of our time because I do know we have a lot of important work to do here today, but I'm really pleased to see so many of you here. And today is a difficult day. It's a difficult for many, but my hope is that as we come together as an organization and as colleagues, and so many colleagues, which is actually wonderful to see in this meeting today, that we will have the opportunity to reflect together, to lean on each other, to learn from each other. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. As I've been in my new role now for a few weeks, I've been reflecting on my own accountabilities to support and advance the work of truth and reconciliation within our organization. And I think it's a heavy responsibility. It weighs heavily on me and I take it very, very seriously. And I'm very grateful for the guidance of many around this virtual table, I suppose, who have been so supportive and so helpful in advancing our work to date. So I really want to thank those who've come before in leading the way, our team who actually began the first Aboriginal service at CAMH. Of course, I didn't know them personally, but tremendous insight to actually start us down a very good path. Certainly extend thanks to Diane Longboat, who in her role as elder and co-chair of the Reconciliation Working Group has led the way for us, along with Dr. Rennie. Rennie, are you here? I can't see you on the screen, but I know I saw you earlier. Thank you all. Thank you to the working group. Thank you to the Aboriginal Caucus, and thank you to all of those here that are supporting the work in so many ways. I'm very confident that we're getting there. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that we are on a path and we have the right guidance that reconciliation is achievable, and CAMH will continue to move forward. And I want to be clear. Can you all hear me? Because I just lost you. Someone give me a sense if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
You can hear you. Great. All right. I can't see any of you, so hopefully the internet connection is good. I just want to be clear that reconciliation efforts, it's the work of everyone at CAMH. It's the work of all of us. And there are many at CAMH, whether there are patients, whether there are staff, families who do not feel safe within our organization. And it's the responsibility of every single one of us, and in particular, non-Indigenous staff, physicians, volunteers, our learners, and partnerships in our academic pursuits, to really reflect and ask ourselves what we can do to dismantle structures that may exclude or deny service to our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis patients, families, and colleagues. So please take this opportunity in this day to reflect on your own biases, to commit to personal growth, and to commit to improve. And as you know, CAMH developed our CAMH Truth and Reconciliation Action Plan. Today is a good day to refamiliarize yourself with that plan if you haven't already done so, and take the opportunity to look at the actions that we've articulated and ask yourself what you can do and what steps you can take to support one or more of the actions that are identified in that plan. There are also many activities that we've shared that you can participate today. I would encourage everyone to review and reflect on the pledge to reconciliation that was created by the Reconciliation Working Group. We've shared the links on the internet site, and please continue to take the opportunity to participate in events like these as we move this work forward. So again, thank you all for taking the time, for marking this important day, for coming together as colleagues, as a team, and as an organization. And thank you to, of course, the Reconciliation Working Group and to Spiritual Care for guiding our discussion today. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Tracy. Diane and I are just two of the 30 CAMH staff, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who comprise the Reconciliation Working Group, and we're co-presenting this hour with the Spiritual Care team. I'll be offering some more remarks, and then I'll pass it over to the Spiritual Care team to lead us in an emotions-focused reflection, after which we'll split into 3 groups to allow for additional sharing and discussion. I'd like to acknowledge that this discussion will be emotional and will touch on topics that will be difficult. If you feel you need emotional supports following this event, please reach out to any of the supports listed in the slide right here. This year has given rise to an enormous swell of engagement with the history of residential schools in Canada. In late May, 215 unmarked graves were uncovered on the grounds of a former residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. Many non-Indigenous people across Canada were shocked by the announcement of these unmarked graves. Emotions ran very high, as many non-Indigenous people were confronted with the grim reality of the residential school system for the first time. We also heard from Indigenous colleagues that residential school survivors had been saying these graves existed, but they were not believed, and therefore action was not taken sooner. We saw tributes and vigils across the country, and the topic of residential schools entered the mainstream like never before. This even resulted in a shortage of orange shirts across Canada, as people wanted to show their support via the Every Child Matters Orange Shirt Day campaign. Fast forward 4 months, and that number has grown to approximately 1,300 graves located at 4 residential school sites. 1,300 at 4 sites. That number is expected to rise exponentially as there are 135 more residential school sites to search. The impact of this is unbearably overwhelming when we consider that 150,000 children were forced to these institutions over the course of 100 years, some of whom are still living, and their descendants continue to experience the living legacy of this trauma. All of these feelings raised another set of feelings. I can only speak to the roller coaster of emotions that I experienced. Feelings of helplessness. What do I do now? Am I doing enough? Could I possibly do enough? Feelings of anger. Why are people just figuring this out now? They should have known before. Feelings of guilt and grief for an idea of Canada that doesn't correlate with the notion of genocide. In discussions with fellow members of the Reconciliation Working Group and others, we came to see how processing these emotions really is an important step in the journey of truth and reconciliation. We at CAMH know better than anyone that ignoring hard feelings is not the same way forward. That when we're stuck in pain or shame or anger, it's difficult to move forward with meaningful action. So today's event is about the importance of beginning to process these overwhelming feelings with the goal of deepening our capacity for allyship. We can't change the past, but we can build a stronger future together through truth and reconciliation. When we talk about truth, we're talking about stories and information that have been excluded from the public record, from nationalist narratives, from public education, and from mainstream news. The truth about residential schools, yes, but also about overrepresentation of Indigenous children in the child welfare system, overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples who are incarcerated, water boil advisories, discrimination in healthcare settings, lower funding for schools in Indigenous communities, and on and on. Non-Indigenous people need to be honest with ourselves about the fact that the Canada we often celebrate is not the Canada experienced by everyone. and that this land's original caretakers continue to be oppressed and marginalized by our governments and institutions. We need to face the truth about our history and about what is happening right now, today. Listen to and learn from Indigenous individuals, groups, and communities who are offering knowledge and experience to you. And work to create spaces where Indigenous individuals, groups, and communities feel safe and inclined to do so. Then we can work to mitigate the effects of intergenerational trauma experienced by Indigenous peoples today, as well as the oppression they continue to face. At CAMH, we're in a unique position to take meaningful action on this front. You might be asking, what role can I play? How can I affect these daunting systems of oppression? I think there are many ways we can affect change, but one thing I'd like to remind you is this. Healthcare is one of those systems. Mental health care and substance use services are most definitely part of those systems. CAMH has openly acknowledged its past as a colonial institution, and some would say it still is. We're in a position to do better here, and if we do it, it will save lives, and we can serve as an example to other institutions as well. Many incredible leaders at CAMH already are. We offer culture and healing as part of clinical care through Aboriginal services and the CAMH ceremony grounds. Last year, CAMH launched Shkabe Makwa, the first hospital-based center in Canada that aims to transform health outcomes for Indigenous peoples through the advancement of healing models that harmonize traditional knowledge and medical expertise. But there's so much more to do. This year, CAMH launched the Truth and Reconciliation Action Plan, which lays out a path for meaningful change at CAMH, resulting in safer, more effective services for Indigenous patients and families, and a safer, more respectful workplace for Indigenous staff. The action plan was initiated and developed by the Reconciliation Working Group, but has been endorsed by leadership, and responsibility for its implementation lies with departments across the organization. So there's a role for each of us to play. In the RWG, we often say that our work is heart work. We don't do it because it's part of our job duties. We're volunteers. We do it because we feel strongly about it and because it's right. So today we've invited everyone to take a pledge to reconciliation. This pledge includes a commitment to learn, heal, and take meaningful action so that the mindsets, structures, and deeply entrenched systems of racism, oppression, and colonial violence are dismantled and no longer find a place among the coming generation. The pledge is posted on Insight, and it's also referenced in the CEO blog that Tracy sent out earlier today. So I encourage all of you to check it out and sign it. We've also included many resources in a variety of formats for learning, healing, and taking action. There should be something there for everyone. By being here today, we're taking a step in that important healing work, but it can't end here. We hope the resources supplied with the pledge will empower you to take the next step to bring reconciliation into your unit, your team or program, and into your personal life. In a moment, I'll pass things over to Brian, Sean, and Eli from Spiritual Care, who will lead us in an emotions-focused reflection. This discussion will likely be uncomfortable for many of us, and that's intentional. We hope that you feel safe in this space to sit with discomfort. Brian?
I'd like to thank Diane and Terry and Tracy for what they've brought here today. And I'd like to thank each of you for coming. As Terry mentioned, this is going to be an emotion-focused approach, and talking about our feelings can sometimes seem self-indulgent, and at other times it can seem unsafe. This is especially true when other people's trauma is the topic at hand, or when elements of our own trauma history resonate with that topic. I'd also like to acknowledge that this isn't the first time that the experience of the dominant culture has been centered in the discussion of truth and reconciliation. But feelings are always present that push us forward or get in our way. And so we need to look at our own stuff before we can really engage the other in a good way. And that's why we're having this conversation. That's why we're taking an emotion-focused perspective. Facts matter and solutions matter, but this space is to notice what we're feeling and what we're feeling about what we're feeling, so we don't get in our way as we learn those facts or facilitate those solutions. This is at the heart of a lot of spiritual care approaches, using our emotions to shine a light on our values so we can engage our whole selves in a good way as we engage those facts, solutions, and each other. The spiritual care department would like to provide a few reflections on some emotions and experiences that might be relevant. It's not an exhaustive list. Sean is going to talk a bit about sorrow and grief, and Eli is going to talk a little bit about guilt and shame, and I'm going to explore anger and fear. I'd also invite you all to mute your computers if possible. So, Sean, what's your experience of grief?
I think grief is an important thing for us to think about. And as we gather today to contemplate settlers' responses and allyships, we're likely prone to feel a lot of different feelings. But one of those feelings is likely to be a sense of grief. And grief has many complexities in our world. We feel grief when we experience loss, and oftentimes we associate loss with a family member, a friend, or a colleague. However, we also feel grief when we see injustice unfolding around us, as has been the case recently when we've all been witness to the discovery of unmarked graves of Indigenous children at several residential schools, as well as our awareness of the murdered and missing Indigenous women across the country. All of these have left a well of sadness in many of our hearts. Grief is more than an emotion. It is a collection of emotions as well as thought processes that move us towards greater acceptance and awareness. Grief largely revolves around questions about our identity. Some of the questions we are confronted with are, who am I now with this loss? How do I integrate this loss into my present and future self? And what shall I do with this loss? Sometimes grief spurs us to action, and sometimes it causes us to reflect and to mourn. Usually, we need to begin the process with mourning, which may fuel further future actions. One of the first things that we do when we've lost a friend or a family member would be to memorialize them by having a funeral or a memorial service. This helps us to begin the grieving process, but it's important to remember that that is only the beginning of the grieving. Despite our expectations for grief to be finished in a short time, grieving takes time, and in reality, grieving never really ends. Today, when we consider the horrible injustices of missing and murdered Indigenous women, the residential school system, and many other issues, we may feel grief related to our sense of fairness and perhaps our identity as Canadian settlers. For some of us, these injustices have forced us to call into question some of our previous beliefs about what it means to be Canadian. We may, as a result, begin to grieve some of our notions that our nation and our government have always been fair and just. And that can be a hard thing for us to accept. And there is grief in that as well. For many of us, this might have been the first year where we did not feel like celebrating Canada Day because it might not represent what we thought that it once did. During today's sessions, you may feel feelings associated with grief, including anger, fear, and sadness. We encourage you to express some of those feelings today as you feel able to. And to continue with this, I want to pass it over to Eli, who will speak about the feelings of guilt and shame. Eli?
Thanks, Sean. Can everybody hear me all right? So I've been asked to talk briefly about the emotions of shame and guilt. So we understand these emotions arise when we have not met our own or our community's standards for right and just conduct, and when we have not acted from within our own value set. And when the outside world points out this gap between our actions and our own or our community's expectations, or when we ourselves acknowledge this gap, we can feel less than. We can feel like a failure and unworthy of love or the esteem of others. Shame and guilt have been differentiated most recently between the origins of the bad thing. So in guilt, we say, I did a bad thing. And in shame, we say, I am a bad person. And both of these emotions tend to provoke an instinctive recoiling away inside ourselves from the action and then from the feelings it evokes from within us. So being seen as doing bad, or worse, being bad, tends to cause people to withdraw or to hide from the view of others or from their own self-perception as a psychological defense. As if by acting as if it never happened, through denial or dissociation, or by shifting the perceived blame to another person or to a larger system in which we're just a small part, we could somehow resolve this deep discomfort of being in touch with our guilt or shame, or the feelings of unworthiness that they evoke. White culture, through the trait of what we call white fragility, carries this trait of avoidance and denial, and the rejection of blame, and that it's part of the legacy of colonialism. Many settlers were raised with racist beliefs passed on to us from our cherished loved ones, and so come to see the lived experiences of Indigenous people and kids through a racist lens, and have used these beliefs to rationalize the inequities that we see between Indigenous people and settlers. Inequities in the law and right of access of Indigenous people to ancestral lands and territories, the devastation of removing children from their parents over generations, resulting in permanent and lasting harm to families and communities and cultures. Inequities in access to safe education, to clean and safe homes and drinking water, inequities in the ability to speak one's own language or practice one's own culture or spirituality. And many, if not most of us here, have lived in times when residential schools were still open. And today we know that Indigenous kids are heavily overrepresented in foster care, what many now call the new residential school system. So one of the ways that I personally have struggled with guilt and shame centers on my relationship to land. Next year, my family will celebrate 110 years of spending summers on the north shore of Lake Bernard on Robinson-Huron Treaty, Treaty 61 territory on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe peoples, in a cottage that was built by my great-great-grandfather. Spending time on that land, in that building, has been one of the most profound gifts of my life. And it's connected me to my ancestors, and it has allowed me to renew my relationship to this beloved land. And I have felt both guilt and shame to know that I and my family have enjoyed this rich history on land that my great-grandfather made his property only 62 years after the signing of Treaty 61. So moving past guilt and shame, I ask myself, how do I move forward as a treaty person in a good way? And today I'm an active advocate of Indigenous-led initiatives like Land Back that call for Indigenous peoples to be at decision-making tables where choices about land use and stewardship are made, and I engage my family about how we steward this land now and in the future. So if guilt and shame lead to denial, hiding, or paralysis, then we have to ask ourselves, how do we make a safe place for ourselves to do the important work of facing these feelings of personal or community failure, of feeling unworthy of the privilege we've lived with, or mostly unknown or unacknowledged? And what energy might be made available if we met our guilt and shame and acknowledged where it keeps us stuck, so that we might put more attention and action into reconciliation? And how can other emotions mobilize us to move forward in our goals towards reconciliation? And so I'll ask Brian to speak to us finally about anger and fear.
Great. Thank you, Eli. So anger and fear, like every emotion, anger and fear are powerful, and anything powerful is dangerous. Fire can heat your house or burn it down. It can cook your food or destroy your neighbor's crops. Emotions are like fire, and fear and anger are powerful allies or terrible enemies. Good anger tells us when a boundary has been crossed and gives us the energy to defend those boundaries. Good fear alerts us to danger and to the possibility of loss. Both anger and fear are designed to keep us safe. But anger doesn't tell us if our boundaries are in the right place. and fear can be evoked by a variety of false perceptions. Anger can be huge, like rage, or small, like frustration. And because talking about our feelings is a vulnerable act, I'm going to model vulnerability by talking about some of my own anger. This was the first year I didn't feel like celebrating Canada Day. I was angry that our reputation was being ruined. I was angry that what I thought was our reputation was built on lies and omissions. I was angry that Canada wasn't living up to our reputation. Cultural genocide is so far from the cultural mosaic that we tout. And child abuse, missing women, and unsafe water is so far from the human rights, healthcare, and social safety net that we tout. I'm ashamed to say that part of me was angry that my bubble was being burst. And that I had one more thing to consider when I'm already overwhelmed. But I was also angry that I was late to start understanding, or a little late to figuring the pieces out. So I had plenty of anger to go around, plenty of places to aim it at. Anger is like my spotlight. If I list those things that made me mad, I can hear all my values, the things that matter to me: reputation, pride, but also excellence, truth, self-care, kindness, justice, shared safety, shared well-being, diversity, being aware, knowing what's going on. So that anger, in line with my values, can give me the energy to engage. Listening to my anger is also a great tool to discover when I need to check myself. Not everything in that honest inventory was above reproach. Not all of my boundaries are in the right place. When anger lights them up, I can see where they are. I'm a work in progress. So given my own background, I used to get angry when someone talked about white privilege, until I learned about intersectionality. Things can both be true and part of a bigger, complicated system. That anger that used to be present to defend myself against threats, both real and somewhat imagined, now put me in solidarity with others who struggle against colonization, or are trying to keep their language, or are needing safety. The facts didn't change, though I did learn a whole bunch of new ones. My relationship to them was reframed. So now my anger is more in line with my values. And so my house is better lit, but it's not on fire. Anger is a gift, but it works best with a bit of wisdom and temperance to give it shape and direction. If anger is about boundaries, then fear wants to keep us safe. It also tells us what matters to us. Fear can be big, like panic, or small, like concern and unease. Sometimes people will use our fear to keep us from acting. For example, if someone else gets what they need, I'll get less, but I'm already struggling. The fear is valid, but the assumptions might not be. That's not how economies work, right? And there are ways where a rising tide can lift all boats. And whether you agree or not, it's an example of how fear wants to keep us safe. Like grief, or guilt, or shame, or anger, fear shines a light on our beliefs and our values, and that's worth exploring. Our emotions can't check the facts for us, but they do tell us what's meaningful. Good fear even played a role in creating today's event. We workshopped the name through 3 changes. We wanted to get it right. We were afraid of missing the mark. We were afraid of not being received, afraid of not having all the answers, afraid of being too direct or not direct enough. And we won't even know what does and doesn't work until the whole thing is done. So yeah, no pressure. But that fear tells us where our need for safety is. That fear tells us what matters. So there are many other feelings that were alive in the process. It wasn't all fear, right? There was also happiness and creativity and curiosity and a bunch of others. But we aren't naive. So fear was also there because this is new territory for some. It's newer to me than I'm fully comfortable with saying out loud in front of all these hundreds of people. And it's not without its pitfalls, even for experts. So fear lit things up. fear lit up the things that matter, the things we want to keep safe. Fear is a gift, but it works best with a bit of wisdom and courage to give it shape. That's how our emotions and reflections can work together to serve us. These are just the tip of the iceberg. You've got a bunch of stuff that are alive in you, and I hope that these examples are useful. When you notice what the feeling is, without judgment, just notice that it's there, and then you notice what it lights up. You can check in on those things, because those are things that matter. Like I said, our feelings can't check our facts for us, but they do tell us what areas of life matter. So what do anger and fear illuminate in you? What are the boundaries and dangers that matter to you? And more generally, what feelings are you willing to bring into the breakout rooms? Thank you.